This morning we're really lucky to have Ben Van Delden from Head of Agri-Food Tech with KPMG. He's also a non-executive director of the Food Agility CRC. Ben has worked for 22 years at KPMG, including 9 as a partner, working with clients in markets across Australia, Europe, Japan, New Zealand and South America. Ben works with clients, identifying and assessing markets and investment opportunities, offering commercial insights and analysis to accelerate commercialisation of ag and food tech. I think he's a great fit for our group because we've got people who are really starting to push the edge of what's going on, and it's that ability to understand how do we grow our businesses in the new century and really take ag forward. So I'd like to thank Ben for coming along and give you Ben.
Thanks, Tim. It's a real privilege for me to be able to talk to you and your members. I think innovation in agriculture is finally starting to change at a rapid pace. So, these opportunities to catch up are, I always relish them. I've got some fresh content to talk through today as well, Tim. So we'll cover a little bit of what we opened up at the Agribusiness Australia talk at KPMG a few months back, but I'll also share with the group some insights from the recent trip that I led to the Netherlands for an Agri-Food Tech and Internet of Farms traction tour earlier in July. So hopefully there'll be some fresh insights for people as well. What I wanted to cover off today really in the time we have is give you a bit of an overview as to the macro setting in Australian agriculture, where we're trying to get to from where we are, and some of the infrastructure that we have in place that should be pointing at enabling us to do that. I'll share some observations on what we need to do to tweak and change some of that. But then, as I was saying, also unpack a little bit about what other markets are doing around the world. It's always important in our businesses that we lift our heads up occasionally and look at what's happening in the markets that we're competing with. Probably pretty relevant too, as we're going through our trade negotiations with the EU and also with the UK. And then coming back to home at the end of the talk, just to share some emerging developments of innovation that hopefully will enable every producer, grower, farmer and Agtech vendor to access a broader suite of ag technology, but if you're a vendor, also access some of Australia's 228,000 farmers. So with that, Tim, I might just see if I can make my slides work. There we go. Work our way through. So I'm sure your members are deeply familiar with the National Farmers Federation strategy piece, Talking 2030, which is really laying out the pathway for Australia to stretch that $100 billion worth of farm gate value. So KPMG had a key hand in writing that piece of strategy with national farmers and the support of Telstra. And of course, a number of leaders across the industry. So I wanted to just unpack the 7 key themes coming out of that paper. And fundamentally, we're working in an environment where we're needing to produce more outputs, and that's driven from an increasing demand globally, the population pressures. Everyone's deeply familiar with the climb from 7 billion to 9.7 billion by 2050. I think we've just clicked over 8 billion earlier than anticipated. So the pressures are absolutely there on producers to be able to get more value, more output per hectare. But we're also seeing that at the same time when there's consolidation in the farming sector. So we're seeing fewer farmers and larger farms. So that's a changing theme for us. And what I find when there's a transaction is that often is the driver for people to think differently about how they accelerate productivity, how they operate their farming practices. So these sort of major events in a farm's life typically is when you see new systems or technologies brought to bear. We're increasingly, with that growing population trend, seeing a drive towards foodism. People are really becoming more interested in what they're eating and I guess the marketing behind the product. So provenance of food and provenance of fibre. There's certainly a growing trend around free from there's ever increasing dietary requirements. I'm not sure if you've been to a function recently, but you see all these different plates laid out for all the different dietary requirements people are starting to have. You know, that can be challenging for caterers, but it can be fantastic for food producers because it just starts opening up nuanced markets. But I think to do that, we have to make sure that we've got confidence and trust and reassurance through that food supply chain. Tim, I don't think that point is going to soften at all. I think the trend is for more of that. And I think the key driver there is we'll see that our food system and our pharmaceutical system merge more and more so into a nutraceutical type model, where we're starting to see food for health really drive the types of products and how those products are being positioned for consumers globally. So digital enabled supply chains is not going away. Then of course, we've got the fact that we're only a population of 25, 26 million here. We really are pointing a lot of our produce offshore, and we're doing that in an environment where there is quite a lot of tension at a trade state level. Obviously, we're all reading about China and the US, but at the same time, we're dealing with Brexit. At the same time, we're dealing with free trade negotiations with the EU. So I think the only certainty is uncertainty at the moment, and that means we need really trusted supply chains and the ability for Australia to defend itself around what is in the can. We know where it's come from. We know with confidence its quality. So supercharging our supply chains, looking for efficiencies as to how we move produce from Australia into our markets is a big opportunity for focus. And I think with that too, Tim, it's not just about pushing our traditional products faster through supply chains. I think as we start to see more investment in regional airports, the opportunity for Australia to export more of our fresh produce, which as we know tends to attract a higher value because it's perishable, into nearby markets of Asia is something that I know a lot of regions, a lot of states across Australia have as a key strategy for growth. Then right in the middle there, growing sustainably, the pressure on all farmers, all food producers, but all industries to really take stock of how they do what they do, what their resource requirements are in their system, understanding the others involved in their supply chain, collaborating differently around minimising wastage. So that might be food waste, but also human resource. An hour is precious, and we want to make sure that that's used wisely. And logistics. So the focus on carbon neutrality, it's a big call out across Australian ag. The red meat sector is striving towards carbon neutrality by 2030. A lot of the new precincts that are being developed for agri-food intensive production are taking that a step further and wanting to be carbon negative. So they're actually looking to sequester carbon. So that's a really interesting proposition. And during my talk, I will unpack some insights from the Netherlands and just look at how Australia fares in terms of how many planets we're consuming. And then there's the talent game, and that's always been a pressure. I think we're at a point now with the emergence of technology coming into the least digitized industry in the world, being hunting and agriculture. I'm not quite sure why they put the two together, but they do. So I think what we will see is people get the opportunity to work with technology in their farming roles, as we'll start to create more attraction for the industry to bring in younger talent and get people involved in rewarding careers where they can use tools that they might otherwise use in a mining environment or perhaps in some of the engineering and other roles that might lure talent away from agriculture. So if we can do that and create the right connectivity in regional environments, hopefully we can see somewhat of a revival of skilled roles in regions. And I know there's a lot of focus on that too from a federal and state perspective. And then there's the drive for leadership and the important pillar that is bringing greater coordination across the sector. And there's been a lot of work done in the last year I know that the federal government have engaged EY to undertake a review of the innovation systems, and I know a lot of the rural development corporations are now going through some deep thinking around, what do they look like in a sort of 4.0 industry environment. With that, industry partners are starting to realise that they've got a key role to play around innovation for biosecurity, but also these digitised supply chains. So I think what we will see is an increasing role of sort of non-traditional actors in the agricultural industry. We'll see more of our sort of blue chip technology companies starting to roll products and solutions out that are targeting the sector, which I think is a fantastic thing. And I would just encourage everyone on the call, if you have the opportunity to participate in some design workshops with any of these organisations, it's really helpful if you do, because then you get their muscle with your insight, and then we'll get the right products. And that leads to the last of the 7, Tim, which is unlocking new technology. I think your members will be familiar with the Precision to Decision project. That was a rural R&D for profit initiative led by the Cottons RDC and the RDC community more broadly. That identified an estimated $20.3 billion benefit to Australian GVP for ag through making sure that the data that can be captured is interpreted rapidly and precisely in the farming environment. And you put that in the context of our $59 billion industry. If we can add a third to that through technologies, that's a dividend worth chasing, I think.
Amazing time in that area. I know from the last couple of people we've spoken to, we've been working with technology for 20 years, and I think it's finally got to a point where we've got tools that help us make things better. Like they've been struggling. It's almost like watching the singularity thing with the computers. Like they've been struggling to catch up to the human resource and the ability of human mind to do things. And now they've finally caught us on this precision ag thing. And 10 years time, it's really going to take off. It's going to be amazing. So a lot of that's exciting. So a lot of stuff there to cover. So looking forward to it, Ben.
Yeah, no, I think you're bang on with that observation. The curve is steepening in terms of uptake or availability, at least, of technology. We have a way to go around what we call digital literacy. So the mindset and confidence of the 228,000 people that work in Australian ag and farming environments to feel comfortable and confident to use some of these available tools. So that's another important mission that I know there's a collective effort from the RDC community really focused on digital capability framework development, so that we can embed the skills so that people are more comfortable having a conversation around ag tech and food tech. We get all that right though, Tim. I think yes, we are a major producer of core commodities, and our biggest export segment is meat. But wouldn't it be fantastic if we could replicate what the Netherlands have done, and their largest export segment is in fact knowledge and technology. So ag tech and food tech, the how we do what we do, not the what we do, could well become a key contributor to our 100 billion target. So just moving through that, then where we are now is the setting is right for a step change across the agricultural sector. We have some varying levels of digital maturity across the industry. I think where we're strongest is around our analytics and to an extent governance. But we have a fair bit of work to do around data, technology and training particularly, and that sort of comes back to my comments about the digital capability framework. And Tim, it's probably worth just calling out the digital capability framework piece of work that Cottons RDC and 11 other RDCs have collaborated on, and that work will be coming out in September and October, which KPMG is leading with the University of Queensland, Skills Impact, and a startup called Fathom, where we're analysing of the 17 core technologies that will be available to the farming industry, which ones will have the greatest impact, which ones will people need to learn how to work with. So, probably worth staying tuned for that coming out. On the right hand side of the slide is the Gartner hype curve, and we've just tried to plot the Agtech categories. When you're on the left, that's the I guess the technology trigger. So this is where new things are starting to emerge. You often read about these because there's lots of excitement, and then as time passes and more work is done on those, we reach what we call the peak of inflated expectations. I thought this was going to be the panacea to all things, and then we ease down through this trough of disillusionment, which is like, well, hang on, how do I really embed this into my business? Is it actually going to add value, or is it just a change in what I'm doing? And then we come back up through the slope of enlightenment, and then plateau out. And if you're thinking about what sort of technology is plateauing out, that would be, for example, the auto steer in tractors. It's been around for a good number of years now, and now we're starting to get more comfortable and confidence, almost an expectation that that's going to be in the technology. So, and if you look around the landscape, and Tim, feel free to jump in at any stage if I'm my mouth's running away on me. So one of the key things that we need to ensure we have across Australia's ag sector is the right infrastructure to enable new technologies to be refined. There's lots out there. In fact, KPMG's got a database of 480 Australian origin ag tech solutions. That's rather overwhelming. The important role that these incubators and accelerators play is connecting the innovator with people, mentors, often capital, but really importantly customers, to try and refine the solutions that they're developing. And this is an important piece. And if you've got commercial producers on the call, Tim, I think there's hopefully some of you have engaged with the accelerators that I've got on the slide here. If you haven't, it's worth just giving some thought to how you might be able to connect, because you will get early stage insight into emerging tech, and you'll have the opportunity to actually shape the product. And I know a lot of farmers I talk to, that's super important for them. It's got 10 functions. I only need 2 and make sure they work. You need to have that conversation when someone's in the design stage, because that'll save them a lot of effort and you'll get what you want sooner. So
it's interesting having conversations that I do with some of the people presented here and behind the scenes, Ben, and one of the biggest benefits they find is their ability to connect with a farmer and a grower or an agronomist or consultant and find out, because they've got these ideas, they sit in wherever it is, producing the software, the solution to whatever it is. But the people who are actually taking it to the next level are the ones that have got a connection with people, because they understand what they can do, but they don't understand what the real problems are. And when they go and sit down with the farmer and go out for a day and spend time with people, they find the solutions they're providing aren't quite there, but they tweak it 10 or 20%. Or the person will be there. I've heard it said like they'll be sitting in a car with someone, and the consultant will start complaining about, this could happen, and the software person's like, that takes 10 minutes. We can do it straight away. Yeah. But so that's the disconnect in the conversation. There's perceived problems that people are solving, and real problems that they don't need to be solved. And if we can sort of have that conversation, well, then that's when we'll start pulling these new technologies through a lot faster, because then they're making an actionable decision and making life better for the users.
Yeah, totally agree. And I was commenting before about the importance of lifting Australia's digital literacy across agriculture. I think the same applies, as you were just alluding, with regards to the innovators that are working in this emerging growing sector. They need to learn farming, and so we've got equal roles to play there in terms of learning a little bit about their language and they a little bit about ours, so that we can actually have an informed discussion and get the right solutions coming through. One thing I would say is that because of our temperate climatic environments across Australia, we have such a good range of climatic zones, soil types, and you know, we go from lush green pastures through to really arid, harsh environments. And what that really presents is a perfect test bed for technologies. If you can make it work in Australia, then you know, this Agtech typically has multiple market options around the world. So you know, we are increasingly seeing international eyes looking at what's coming out of Australia. I would say that most of the Australian Agtech is being designed with an Australian market in mind, and we really need to lift our heads up and see the big prize, which is offshore as well. So hopefully, as we shine more light on the successes coming out of Australia, we'll see more capital coming in and more Agtech exports. Tim, I thought I might just share with you some insights and lessons that New Holland can learn from Old Holland. And so the reference there is, you know, 400 years ago when the Dutch first arrived up in the top of the Northern Territory, and they mapped Australia, they called it New Holland. Obviously, it's gone on to bigger and better things in terms of names. But for 2 years now, and recently, as 2 weeks ago, I lead a agri-food tech and Internet of Farms traction tour for chairmen and directors and CEOs up to the Netherlands for a week to really look at the ecosystem of the role of government, the role of the research and university ecosystem, the role of accelerators, what leading technology companies are doing, leading food producers and food processors are doing. We have a good look at the supply chain innovations to really get our heads around what's coming over the horizon. And yeah, last year, the top left-hand corner, we spent a bit of time in one of Lely's robotic dairy farms, and you can see the farmer there in the middle. It's one person to 180 cows. The robots are essentially moving all the feed to the livestock. There's automated milking systems. Now that's been around for a few years. I haven't seen too much to the scale that they have in the Netherlands deployed here in Australia in terms of that level of automation. There are some farms here, but I think we've got something like 100 installations of the robotic milking system in Australia. So we're a little bit behind in terms of how automation is being applied in dairy. And I appreciate that's because dairy is going through some challenging times. So the available capital for investment in this stuff is not easy to access. But at the time we were talking to Lely last year, they were talking about this concept of a fully robotic farm. And on the right-hand side, you can see Dr. Michelle Allen taking a photo of Matt Brand, so the chairman of Meat and Livestock Australia, taking a photo of the CEO of Hort Innovation, feeding what is a herd of 40 dairy cows that are on a 2-story floating barge in the port of Rotterdam. So this floating dairy farm is entirely contained. So the livestock are on the top deck. You can see there. They're fed, they are milked on the barge. They do have a ramp which they can walk off and get some exercise on one of the lots that the barge is docked against. But by and large, these animals, just like they live in the barn on the left, on the right, they're living in an outdoor barn on a barge. Underneath is the milk vat, so that's where they do all the on-site pasteurisation and processing. And just what you can't see in the picture, but off to your right, is a 40-foot container where consumers can ride up on their bike, open the door to the container, swipe their EFTPOS card, sterilise their bottle, get their pasteurised milk at source, and off they go. The really interesting thing here is Lely have put their technology into this solution, but the role of the supermarkets. So Lidl, a large German supermarket, has taken an offtake agreement for 23 of their local stores in Rotterdam to take some of this milk. And the reason for that is the cultural demands from some religious groups who require unpasteurized or fresh from farm milk and yogurts. So we all know there's some food safety risks with that, but there's a market there. And the key point here is if you can totally encapsulate a farming system and track and monitor all of your effluent discharge, which they are working to convert that into power, then you've got a closed loop system. And if here in Australia we want to be carbon neutral by 2030 in the red meat sector, and here you've got a dairy system that's really trying to measure and monitor its entire inputs and outputs, yeah, I think it's going to accelerate our step towards that. Behind this barn is a floating solar barge, and that's driving a lot of the power for the robotics in the system.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tim. You...
No, you're right. Keep going.
Yep. And you know, you sort of go, well, that's kind of wacky. Why would you do it? It's about a €3 million investment, and it's really to try and streamline the efficiency, zero waste. The intention is to evolve this and put another couple of barges alongside. They're looking to have a floating poultry system there where they'll have layer birds and also on-site multi-stacked modular greenhouse facilities for growing leafy greens. So that one's a bit more imaginable. It's basically taking a greenhouse and putting it on a barge. Livestock's a little bit more different.
Obviously, they haven't told Peter where this barge is yet.
Well, yeah, it'd be there in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So look, it's really interesting to see what's evolving and how quickly. Last year that wasn't there, and and here it is now. So there's been some quite transitional innovation. So what can we learn from the Netherlands? And we've entitled this slide "A Little Bit of Dutch Goes a Long Way." And you'll know when you go out, if you're lucky enough to go on a date or just going out with mates, and they say, let's go Dutch. Basically, you equally share in the cost, right? And that's a core philosophy that the Netherlands have, not just when they're going out for dinner, but when they're thinking about investing in infrastructure. I think for us, there's some lessons to be learned there. We need to move our mindset from competing on the who's got the best access to power or water and core infrastructure enablers, and actually ask ourselves, if we're building an asset, who else could use some of those core elements so I can focus on the quality of the product that I'm selling to my consumer, and start sharing some of the burden of that infrastructural cost. We can talk a little bit more about that later. But what really jumps out is when you look at the level of exports from the Netherlands, $158 billion Australian equivalent, versus what we're exporting, which is 48.7 billion. And admittedly, this was 2017, so our numbers will be a bit lower as we've come off the back of some drought effect. But effectively, they're doing 3 times more, right? And they're considerably smaller than Australia. So our land mass, 7.6 million square kilometres, there's 41,500 square kilometres. So to put that into perspective, if you're from Victoria, the Netherlands fits nicely into Gippsland. So 185 times smaller than Australia. The flip on that is effectively 3 times more exports there. Essentially, when you look at the productive hectares, they're getting 810 times more value per hectare. And the driver behind that is they do import a lot of produce and add value to it. So that does give them a lift there. Their imports are just under 100 billion, but you can still see that they're managing to add more value than Australia does, despite us not having much in the way of imports. And right at the bottom of the slide, the top 3 agri-food sectors that for our exports, as I mentioned earlier, red meat, 24%, grains, 18%, nearly 19%, and wool at 7.4%. And then you look at the Netherlands, and their largest contributing sector in agri-food is materials and technology. A big part of that is seeds and starter materials for greenhouses, but also the climatic control systems, misting systems, the technologies that work across dairy robotics, etc., all falls into that category. And then you've got horticulture, which is probably what we think of them more for. But surprisingly, meat exceeds dairy for the Netherlands. And there are some really significant red and white meat processors in the Netherlands that sort of doing 300,000 pigs a week. And so there's some real scale over there.
So how do we bring that sort of scale to Australia, Ben? Like the thing I looked at when I saw you present last time was like they were integrating, instead of farmers competing against farmers, they were all integrating together and creating big businesses that had efficiencies that allowed everybody to do well, and then try and, I suppose, leverage off the different skill sets that different farmers have. So not everybody's competing against each other, and you're also growing a.
Yeah.
How do we go about bringing that sort of thought process to Australia, or is that even the right question? But yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, there's much we can learn, and we are two completely different geographies in terms of size, but also the environment. But we're also in different market locations as well. So it's going to be quite difficult to replicate the Netherlands, who have something like 300 million consumers within a sort of an hour or two's lorry ride from the Netherlands, right? So the ability to move product to consumers is that much easier for them. But there are some things that we can definitely learn. And one thing I would say is the role of government in the Netherlands in this sector. They have got what they call the top sectors. So the 9 top sectors for industry in the Netherlands, 2 of which are in the agri-food space. When you think about Australia and you think about our 15 RDCs, right, that's just in the agri-food space. We are fragmenting so much of our effort across 15 RDCs, 41 universities, 8 state departments of agriculture, versus 2 top sectors, probably 4 or 5 universities in the Netherlands that are really focused in this space. And they have 12 regions, but those regions are 20 minutes drive from each other. So what we need to think about is, have we got too many layers, too many structures? How are we going to make sure that when we're focused on research and innovation, we're not duplicating effort, we're actually trying to really scale our limited resources and make the biggest impact out of it. So I think how we organise ourselves around the industry groups, does need looking at. And that said, I think the important thing here is the Netherlands really take a entrepreneurial industry lead in or a leading indicator. So if the entrepreneurs set the strategy and they need to be profitable, then government will come in and support the priorities that have been validated by industry. And that support then cascades into directioning into the university systems around research. So you've got industry with quite a clear voice and hand on the tiller in terms of where that innovation needs to go. But also, as you've pointed out, Tim, what we need to do as well, I think, is really think about the location of some of our assets in agriculture. It's really hard to move a farm, but as we start to think about the opportunities that intensive food precincts present, and there's a lot of work going on across multiple states on this topic, right across, so from Toowoomba, where you've got the Atlas Australian Agri-Food Technology Logistics Innovation Solutions Precinct, 760 hectares there for protected cropping and advanced manufacturing with 5G, through to Western Sydney Airport Aerotropolis, where there's a lot of work being done to develop an agri-food precinct for food processing straight into the belly of aeroplanes flying out of that airport, through to regions like Townsville and other locations across Australia, really looking at how can we create greenfield sites where we grow food, typically horticulture, or process and pack food. And that's when we're going to see a lot more of these opportunities to co-invest in core infrastructure. If you think about how many processors have cold storage facilities, imagine an intense environment where you could actually have cold storage as a service, and really reduce the amount of duplicated capital that's going in, as an example. So I sort of talk about the 3 C's and the 3 S's of difference. Culture, when you talk to a Netherlands ag and food player, they've got this mindset around collaboration. They start with the question of who should I partner with? And they're also somewhat more Dutch and direct, and that includes some pretty open discussions with animal welfareists. So the dialogue is at the outset. We're now starting to see some pretty successful cases come out of the Netherlands where, with input from the lobbyists, at an early stage, they're designing products that are meeting their needs, and then those lobbyists are endorsing those products into the consumers. So they're sort of using the voice for good, if that makes sense. Clustering, being really regional specific. What is a region good at? And let's make sure that we attract the right capability to that environment. The World Horti Centre is a good example of that, Tim. It's just coming up to its second birthday. This facility has 105 different horticulture supply organisations with a permanent trade expo on site. They've got 35 research greenhouses right beside each other. So competitors are trialling different products there. Why? One piece of glass covering the roof, one core infrastructure for the heating, and you've got your own environment for doing your annual testing. And then on site, they have living laboratories where 2,500 students each week come to learn about the hands-on aspects of horticulture. And the CEOs come in and present every Friday, talking about the issues that their businesses are facing right now. And those CEOs know exactly what the students are learning, because the CEOs got hold of the curriculum from the universities and rewrote it, because they wanted talent that was going to come into their businesses that could help them with the current issues that they're facing. So industry taking the tiller and really saying, this is what we need. We might need to invest some capital in creating these environments. This is now such a successful model. They're replicating this across China and into aspects of Asia as well. So done well, these collaborative models can be really picked up. Circularity, so the circular economy, I might come back to that in the subsequent slides. And then the S's, so shared investment, as I said before, if you've got a greenhouse, for example, then you need power, you need water, so does your neighbour. Why don't you have a cooperative investment structure? That's quite common in the Netherlands. Solution focused, everyone we were talking to was talking about the solution in their business. So Philips Lighting, or Signify as they're called now, yes, they make light bulbs, but they've learnt the effect of the red and blue lights on leafy green products, for example, and now their model is moving to lighting as a service, where you will basically pay a subscription fee, you'll get your light, you'll get over-the-year upgrades of lighting recipes to optimize the performance of your nutritional output of the plants. And lastly, sustainability. There's a very heavy lens on phosphate, a very heavy lens on water, and basically there's too much manure in the Netherlands, so they get strong overlays. 2 years ago, the EU came through and forced them to cull 11% of their dairy herd because their emissions were too great. So a very strong regulatory impost around sustainability. Not to mention they're 4 or 5 meters under the sea level. So when you have those two pressures, you have to innovate. So there's something in that for us around, we don't want Australia to sink, but maybe we can do with a bit more of a impetus to innovate. So I'll just keep tracking, Tim. So one of the things that really stood out for us when we were talking to the KPMG specialists in Rotterdam on this trip was who focus on circular economy and sustainability, was this concept of the Earth Overshoot Day. And basically what this looks at is at what point in a year, if what we should have as the planet is we should take from it just enough that the planet can self-replenish. Now, where we're at is we're taking more than we should be, essentially. So when we look at all the countries around the world and their behaviours, at a net level, we're overshooting what the Earth can produce and renew from the 29th of July forward. So we're almost at the point that we've consumed a year's worth of planet. The interesting thing is what would it look like if the world behaved like Australia? And the sad thing is it'd be even worse. So from an Australian point of view, the work done by the Global Footprint Network, where they look at the national footprint accounts across each nation, would suggest that Australia's annual consumption has occurred by the 31st of March, which is pretty concerning, and only about 2 weeks later than the United States and Canada. But what I think is really interesting for us is look at where China is around the 14th of June. Now, that's largely because they've got a large land mass, and there's deep population pockets, but there's also quite a bit of spread. But then you look at Indonesia, which is right up there at almost at a equal level to the 18th of December. So they're almost at the right place. Now, a lot of that is to do with the rainforest environment that they have as well. But this is I think quite a sobering takeout. If we're exporting to a market like China, or we're competing to get our products into China and we're competing against Brazil, where do we sit? At what point does this start to become a technical trade barrier when countries are starting to ask the question, how well are you playing as a role in terms of looking after the planet? So pretty sobering. That's led the EU to come out with the 2024 agenda, which is really driving pressure into agriculture around circular ag. And that's the whole point about circularity. It's about looking at how do you use all inputs efficiently and outputs getting reprocessed back into the system. Effluent is a big contributor to some of the problems and phosphate leakage. So there's now a lot of work going into how do we capture that, separate the urine from the feces and use those different elements for creating energy and fert. And a lot of the Common Agricultural Policy funding is now going into efforts to reduce emissions. So again, we have to just be mindful of the competitive landscape. If a market like the Netherlands is starting to develop more environmentally friendly products, if you like, if consumers latch onto that and we're not meeting that, or able to meet it with a claim of our own, then we'll be disadvantaged when it comes to the supermarket shelf. So something to watch for. Food waste hierarchy.
I think in some ways I'd like to see us try and innovate our way out of it instead of restrict our way out of it. And sometimes I think that needs to come in the conversation around some of those things. Like we get stuck on what are we taking, but how do we innovate more production from what we're doing and try and do better with what we've got, and instead of just going a closed, shut down. I sort of see that commentary coming through sometimes, and from an ag point of view, we are doing it as well as we can, and we just need the technology to keep. We need good brain cells in there to help us innovate better, and then we can do more with less, like what ag has done for the last 50 years. And I reckon that's how we come out of it. I think that's the way I'd like to see that conversation go.
Well, and I think the key word there is conversation, because we can look at our own farming or food production process in the supply chain and see what we can control. But actually what you need is the first thing that each of us on this call should do is think about the linear supply chain we're involved in. So, where are we? Where have we got this sort of consumption mindset where we must have more? We must also think about, okay, well, how do we do it with less? What am I using that's only going to have a single use in my supply chain? It's too easy for us just to put our blinkers on and go, well, I got this product from another supplier. That's not my problem, it's theirs. But we actually need that conversation, Tim. We need to be thinking about it in that holistic end-to-end. How do we reduce the impact and the cost? This is an important message. Circular is not a new word for greenies trying to take over agriculture. Circular is about sustainable businesses. It's about growing bottom line, and it's about having a better impact on the planet and people's health as we do it. So it's easy to say, hard to do, but the prize is really worth going for, I think, Tim.
Yep, and I think it sort of goes back to what we've been talking with other people about. It's how do we innovate our way to the challenge of feeding 10 billion people. I think that's part of the thing. It's about how do we use science and technology to get us there, really. So no.
Yeah, totally. So just moving closer to home, just in terms of our challenges, how do we embrace the technology that I talked about at the top of the call? First of all, really, it's now time to bust the myth around the access to connectivity in regional and rural Australia. It has been a comment that has been regularly touted that I can't connect, technology is not available for me. And so I've got to say, now we're in a position where, particularly with the near orbit nano satellite technology, if you need data moved from sensors or to sensors, it is now possible almost anywhere in Australia to get that connectivity. Now, it's not possible to have the luxury of 4G connectivity like some of the city dwellers enjoy, but progress will be made. But the point is, if you need to have the Internet of Things connectivity in a regional environment in Australia, it is possible. It's just a question of what's the right solution for you. So we're at a point, Tim, as you said earlier, where we're actually able to move out of the digital darkness that Australian ag has had to live in because of the challenges around connectivity. And that now presents a real opportunity for IoT and Agtech to really shift in terms of adoption across Australia, because that connectivity barrier is becoming less of an issue for us. So if we're able to get connectivity, then the question we should be asking ourselves is really, well, what's holding us back? And a big thing we hear a lot from growers and producers, farmers is, geez, I just don't know what's out there. And I mentioned there's 480 Australian origin solutions. Add to that all the international solutions. How do you choose? Where do you go? And who's done it before that we can learn from, speak to, read about, and make sure that we learn from their efforts and not make mistakes or repeat mistakes others may have made. And then there's the other one, which is, what's the business case for this technology? And, people can get lured in by the sticker price, but we all know with anything that's technology orientated, you've got to train your people. You've got to make sure it talks to the other systems that you're using in your business. You've got to make sure it gives you the outputs that you need on a timely basis in a format you want. So building the business case for the tech is one of the three things that we think are slowing us down. So if we could have connectivity, what's the right one for your farm? And the point here is, there really isn't an answer to that. It depends on what it is that you're doing, how big your operation is, what you're wanting the data for, and really importantly, what are those pain points and opportunities that you think, if you had the information or you could make more informed predictive analytics, or you could use robotic support, what would it be to do? And that's the really important first step, because once you've done that, then you can look at some of these available connectivity solutions, which is all in KPMG's Agri 4.0 connectivity at our fingertips report, which you can access from the website. It's written essentially to try and demyth what the different technologies are, help people understand the language of Agtech, take you through licensed, unlicensed LoRaWAN. What does it mean? What if I want to be a super tech savvy farmer and be able to do facial recognition of my livestock? I want to have my own private network for mobile. Well, then you're probably in the wireless mesh on-farm Wi-Fi zone. Or what if I'm just a large station sheep farmer that needs to know that there's enough water at that trough, and I don't want to drive for 3 hours a day getting out to that location to check it? Then Fleet or Mariota with their, or Hyber with their satellite and LoRaWAN and systems might be the answer. So there's a lot there, and then if you have the connectivity, then you're spoilt for choice in terms of Agtech. This is some of the 480, Tim. Look, what we're seeing is an increasing number of these come to market, an increasing number of them disappear from the market. There's certainly a need for more consolidation, and by that I mean farm management software typically is going through a trend of bolting on, ingesting more and more sensor technology. So you almost get a stack of solutions. And the reason for that, of course, is the farmer wants one view of their operation, make that nice and clear for them. And the providers want to get super sticky with their customer. So the more they can put in there, the more captive I think they feel that relationship is.
It's one of those things when you've got small innovative companies coming through though, that's usually when you see all the innovation come through as well. Like if you get the big ones, they tend to become a bit anemic when it comes to coming up with new ideas. They don't have to come up with a new idea to survive, whereas the little ones have to do something, otherwise they go out. And that's often you see some really good stuff come through on.
That's a very good point.
On when they're bootstrapping everything basically. So yeah, no, it's exciting
Very
times.
good point. Very good point. In terms of what's happening to drive the uptake, just to refresh people's awareness, there's been a fair bit of publicity about this in Victoria recently too. So the digital ag IoT trials that the Victorian government are funding, so they've allocated 12 million from the, I think it's 14 million that they have for black spot and regional connectivity. They've put 12 aside for 4 agricultural trial sites. So Mafra in Gippsland focusing on dairy, Tatura focusing on horticulture, Birchip for grains, and Serpentine for sheep meat. And the intention there over a 2 to 3 year period is to deploy with government funding support for the connectivity and for voucher support for the Agtech, these solutions, or a selection of solutions, to up to 600 farmers. So I think, Tim, if we can get that level of adoption in Victoria in 2 years, we'll really accelerate to that tipping point where technology is just becoming the norm in a farming environment. And we can learn a lot when we have a trial of that size. I haven't seen anywhere in the world yet that has tried to reach that many farmers and provide them with access to Agtech. So that's one to watch. If you're in those regions, get onto the Ag Victoria website. Now, if you're not in those regions, there's a fair bit going on across New South Wales at the moment as well. And I know also in Western Australia, those state governments are really looking at ways to enable farmers to access support for reaching the technology. A new bit of innovation coming to market in Australia. Very excited about this. KPMG's got a heavy hand in this one. It's a collaboration initiative with the Food Agility CRC, IAG, National Farmers, Meat and Livestock Australia, AgriFutures, and a few others that have decided that for too long the dialogue around Agtech has been focused on who's investing in it and what stage are they? Are they seed? Are they Series A, B, C? What was the multiple? Who's the founder? That's super interesting. It's all for nothing if there's no market. And so we decided that what we needed to do was create a solution for farmers that really helps them come into an Agtech Finder platform in the industry vertical that they're involved in and find solutions based on the problems that they're facing. It also plays a pretty key role for vendors because it will allow vendors to be matched with the needs of farmers. So farmers will search for something and they'll get a short list of solutions based on the attributes of the farmer's need or problem and the attributes of the technologies that are registered on the site. It also will help connect regional service providers. So the service installers, the maintainers of technology in regional environments, to basically connect with vendors and become a representative agent, if you like, and the connector to the farmer to help them actually implement and support the technology. So this comes out in August, Tim. It's we're sitting with something like 230 Agtech solutions are registered on there. There's information about their product, what it does. Many cases there's YouTube clips on how it works. There's often customer references. So there's a lot of information to help farmers make decisions and Agtech vendors find a market. This is a lens of what you'll see here in horticulture.
So just a quick one. Is this only for people who've actually got a product that's on the market, or vendors that have got a product on the market, or can it be for vendors, people producing solutions in early stages, or?
Yeah, good point. Look, the key question we ask is how many installations have you got? And we've got a couple of ranges or buckets there for that, and we make that clear on the site. So the reason we make it clear on the site is that some early adopter farmers, some aggressive innovators, are willing, to the point you made earlier, to work with an earlier stage startup because they have a better chance of informing the direction of the product. Yeah. Others say, look, hey, we want someone else to have done all that trial and testing. We want it when it confidently works. So we wanted them to have the ability to find solutions that have been deployed a number of times, so they have a bit more confidence. So yes, it's there for everyone. But one of the downstream features that will be added to Agtech Finder platform is a quality mark. So we heard a lot from the nearly 60 farmers that we interviewed that when they're making an Agtech decision, a lot of it comes down to, does this stuff really work? And there's a lot of snake oil salesmen out there that will tell you it does, when in reality it might be a different outcome. So what the Agtech Finder platform will introduce over the next year is a quality mark where the vendors can say, hey, great, we're one of a couple of hundred solutions on the site. We want to make sure that the farmers know that ours has been robustly tested. So there'll be a quality mark process that is being developed, similar, if you like, to like an ISO type of approach, which will give some independent confidence to the marketplace, hopefully deal with that issue.
Yep.
How are we going for time, Tim?
Well, it's entirely up to you, mate. I think we've got probably 10 or 15 minutes. So including questions. So.
All right. Okay. Well, I might just go for maybe another 5, and then we can pause for some questions. So one of the other things that we've increasingly seen with the clients we work with at KPMG is this real drive to be able to authenticate and certify the product so that we can, I guess, support that promise to the consumer and create a trusted, reliable journey of the product from on-farm through processing, through logistics, shipping, distribution to the consumer. And do so in a way that we can track the sustainable objectives of that supply chain, ethical compliance with modern slavery legislation that's effective from 1 July now for any producer that's turning over 100 million or 50 million, if you're lucky enough to have a footprint in New South Wales, you need to comply with this new legislation. So that's sort of leading to a rethink around assurance in the food supply chain. So one of the areas that we and many others are working on, of course, is the role of technologies like blockchain, for example, but blockchain integrating with proof points that validate the inputs across a supply chain and ultimately present right through to the consumer a history and a story of the confidence of that produce as it's moved from farm through those different stages, making sure that it's picking up the validation and certification from the various compliance and industry bodies, but doing it in a way, Tim, where if you don't comply, the digital certificate can be removed from the blockchain so that the consumer knows that there is an issue with the trust of that network. So it's a real-time impact that gets direct to the consumer if there's been a breach of trust. And part of that is working on understanding the trust points that are critical from the customers, for proof of title, for example, through producers who are interested, the inputs and safety elements of the food production, right through to the regulators in terms of LPAs for red meat, or MRLs for grains and cropping, AQUIS requirements. All of these trust points need ultimately to be measured with IoT solutions rather than paper-based human measurement points. So there's a really interesting acceleration of focus, I think, going into digitising compliance across agri-food production systems. And why would you do that? Well, we know that, for example, the EU spends $5 billion a year just on food safety auditors. That is a lot of manual testing, it's sampling, it's random, and still things get through. It's time to revolutionise that with IoT and Agtech. So that's what I wanted to cover, Tim. And I'll just leave on this slide, if we leave that up for a bit, the Agri 4.0 connectivity at our fingertips is the report that I spoke about, the connectivity solutions that Meat and Livestock and Atlas collaborated with KPMG on, so people can find that if they need it on our website.
I'll just try and get, I might just have to try and get my screen and take over again, just so I can get.
Yep. I'm going to stop sharing.
Yeah, if you can stop sharing, that'd be great. Awesome. I'll grab that. Hopefully, that's you. This way I can at least sort of see what's going on here. And have we still got your screen up on yours there, Ben? Is that what you're seeing? No, you're seeing me.
I'm seeing you now.
Yep.
Is that what you wanted?
No. I'll put this one here back up, screen 2. Share that. Awesome. There we go. That'll do. At least I can drive what's going on with the Q&A and all that now. So yep. just a couple of things there. Are we actually going to see any returns, you think, from the blockchain scenario? Is there actually going to be money in it, Ben, or is it going to be another one of these compliance things that we have to go and do? It's just another layer of regulation that's going to be taken on by the farmer.
Yeah, look, that's a really important question to talk through, because you know, if you're going to do anything in your business, it needs to add value, and the way that value is really directed back to a business owner is it's creating new value, or it's reducing cost. And I think when I talk to a lot of our clients that are in the food processing game particularly, things like blockchain for food assurance, they see as a cost reduction drive primarily. They get the confidence benefit of a digital captured certified system, but largely they're reducing the need for paper-based pens, notepads, the risk of losing that or inaccurate recording of data, and the challenge that comes with having to go back through a compliance audit and find the record. Like, all of those efficiencies start to unlock when you are using digital systems for not just capturing in your business, but sharing that through the supply chain. And remember, supply chain participants can be regulators. So, you know, it's about that, you know, letting your workforce focus on producing food and processing food rather than pushing pens.
Yeah, so it's an efficiency.
So, yeah, I think, yep.
It's an efficiency thing. Just going back to probably a couple of things. Just, you know, on the Dutch thing, there's obviously shared investments they're talking about in the ag sector and how they go and set up scenarios. Is KPMG looking at helping clients work in that area, as in farmers and investors and that, to try and set up bigger, better models to try and, you know, create more efficient farming systems, like bring capital in, have some shared farming scenarios, use a bit of your expertise in you know, in accounting and systems and all the rest of it to help create more efficient business units?
Yes, yeah, we're actually getting more and more involved in those types of projects that you've just described. So when we have these transaction points in an asset's life, that's often when the new owner needs to really think about how they're going to drive a more efficient production system. So we're doing quite a lot of work where we'll come into an organisation and start by just mapping, if you like, the data points that they rely on in their system, and that discussion is to identify what are you measuring, how are you measuring it, how are you capturing it.
Yeah.
We then look for opportunities to digitize that. So what would we do with sensors to make that capture more efficient, and then look at the analytics and how can we build solutions that or point them to solutions that will help them analyze that more efficiently. But there are a number of large sort of system-wide projects that we're working on as well, Tim, with respect to sort of 700,000-800,000 hectare type intensive precincts, which are greenfield opportunities for particularly processors that are looking to relocate, get cheaper energy, do it in a place where they've got the right neighbours that might be providing the bio-waste transfer into packaging, or access that sort of clustered environment and achieve some of the benefits from circularity. That's another area that we get a lot of work at the moment, and interest is around looking at supply chains and how can we really address the need or the opportunities to take cost out, take waste out, and drive more circular benefits.
Yep. And if you got clients who are looking at maybe expanding their business and looking at different markets, I mean, how do you go about helping them in that area? Like, let's say we've got a big horticultural operation there and they're thinking about getting to Asia and things like that. Big, broad question, I know. Is that something you work with clients on then? Or?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we do actually. We do quite a bit of market access advice. We have a special team actually called Access Asia. So these are people that have lived and worked in the Asian market and know the real salt on how to set up an in-market supply chain and distribution network. Trust is the big challenge up there. So we have specialists that help with that. And then we also do a bit of work in particularly the hort and red meat space around understanding the regulatory hurdles for exporting food into different markets, and how do we design the right supply chains and supply chain partners to enable that produce to get there and get past the gate. And another area that we focus on too is in terms of that market access is telling that trusted supply chain story back into Australia. So how do we capture the right information, find the markets that are going to pay the premium, and design that sort of supply chain network to return the value back to the producer here.
Yep.
Some of that too, Tim, does result in different equity models where we're seeing interest from the foreign investment to participate in that supply chain more locally. So that's, I think, I always encourage that, because it means you've got a stickier partner if they've got skin in the game with a bit of capital in your operations locally.
Yep. No, it makes sense. So if anybody else has got any more questions for Ben, just give you the opportunity to ask them now. And just, I suppose, anything else you want to add to what you've sort of presented so far, Ben? What are the key ways forward we can move with what you were talking about today?
Yeah, look, I think if you're interested in agri-food technology and you're just wondering how to get involved, jump on and have a look at the Agri 4.0 report. It's, I think, helpful to understand the 5 use cases of different grain and meat producers that we showcase at the back of that document, how they've engaged with the technology, what they've learned from it. But you also get a bit of a sense as to what's out there and where you could start. If you're interested in these new models around circularity, or getting involved in a more efficient production and processing environment through some of the precincts, like the ones in Toowoomba or Western Sydney, or the developments up around Townsville and Cairns, or other markets, reach out to us and we can connect you in with those operators. And yeah, I think the last one, Tim, if you're a producer and you're thinking about how do we build trust in the supply chain, and what role could tools like blockchain or other things play for you, then again, please just give me a call or an email. Very happy to help connect you with an overview of what's available, and see how we might be able to assist you into that technology path.
Yeah, it's a big thing coming through, and it's just trying to get your head around how it's all going to fit in. And but anyway, it's going to be interesting to see where that goes in the next 10 years.
Absolutely.
I think we've run out of time. I really want to thank Ben for your time today, for coming on. It's been great. I hope everybody's really appreciated it. Just want to remind everybody we've got one coming up in a month's time with Emery Weston from Austrade, looking at bringing overseas capital. So it's a little bit of some of the questions I was asking you there, Ben, was trying to feed into that as well. So yeah, but Ben's a top quality operator, and we've been really lucky to have you along today, Ben, and thank you so much for giving time for us this Friday.
It's an absolute pleasure, Tim, and wish you and your team all the best. So look forward to staying involved and staying connected.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next month. Thank you.